Welcome to the show where we talk service, sacrifice, and stories, connecting you with the past and the most interesting people in the field of veteran causes and commemoration. My name is Ryan, along with co-host Matt. We are with Memory Anchor, a company committed to using technology for good as we work at changing the way the world remembers. Today, we're talking with Simon Bendry with the Commonwealth War Graves Commission, who we've had the pleasure of talking to many times and working with for a couple of years now. Thank you so much for being on the show, Simon.
No, real pleasure to join you guys. Thank you.
Yeah, well, it's great to see you, Simon, and we've really gotten to know each other over the last couple of years. And I think, though, I'd love to hear. Imagine you're at the beginning of a battlefield tour that you're leading. How would you introduce yourself to the group? Because I think listeners would like to know just kind of like what kind of keeps you busy.
Yeah, so as Ryan said, I work for the Commonwealth War Graves Commission. I've been with the Commission for 5 years. My responsibilities are for our education, community engagement and volunteering programs. So that's a lot of the sort of outreach work that we do. In all honesty, it's got to be one of the best jobs within the Commission. It's that opportunity of going out, speaking to the public and engaging new generations with what we do. It's sharing those stories. It's bringing those sites to life. And allowing people to, truly engage with what makes them so special as well. So, absolutely, start of anything like that, that's normally the pitch. It's just it's a great role to have. I'm very lucky.
I always look at your work and what you get to do. I'd be gunning for your job if I was looking for one there, Simon. So you probably one of the best jobs I can think of. Yeah, no, you're not going anywhere. I'd have to fight you for it. It's interesting. Just when you say the Commonwealth War Graves Commission and coming into what I do now, the Commonwealth War Graves was instrumental in inspiring me into creating Memory Anchor, being at one of your sites. And it's one of those organizations that if you're familiar with it and you're in the field, it's quintessential. Like everybody knows it. And yet there's a part that some people aren't always aware of it. And, if you're general public, you go into one of these cemeteries, they don't take care of themselves. It's not just like it magically appeared. What do people need to know about the Commonwealth War Graves Commission for those who don't know about it?
Yeah, it is. As you say, Ryan, it's an interesting one. There's, often talk about the cemetery fairies because, the number of sites that we have across the globe and then the opportunities of you actually seeing some of our gardening team maintaining those sites. Some people can visit for many, many times and still not see the gardeners at work. So who are we? Yeah, who are we as an organisation? We were established during the First World War. We trace our origins back to the very early days of 1914 and the British Army's role on the Western Front. We attach a lot of our origins to one individual, a man called Fabian Ware, who went out to France, the story goes, having responded to an advert in the newspaper for gentlemen of independent means with their own motor car who could assist the army in ferrying wounded soldiers around. Sounds completely bonkers, but this actually happened. So he goes out there, he's with a unit of the British Red Cross, and he quickly becomes aware of a number of things whilst carrying out his job, in that the army has very little provision for formally marking graves, or certainly keep in the chaos of 1914, keeping a record of where those graves are. And secondly, it doesn't really have that record of that. So it's the locations, but also the record of those locations. And then over the sort of next couple of years, there's this evolution of that role, the formalization of his role, that sees the creation of an organization that becomes responsible for maintaining a record of all of those who've died, but also then maintaining those places of burial. By the end of the First World War, that will evolve then into also considering what you did about those who had no known grave, whose bodies had been missing, or also solving the problem, for example, such as the Royal Navy had, where sailors had no grave but the sea. And therefore, it then sort of evolved that solution of creating the memorials to the missing for those who had no known grave. And fascinatingly enough, our organisation still continues to do everything it was set up to do originally. We still update and maintain those records, and those records are incomplete. We still build and maintain cemeteries. And today, we operate in over 150 countries and territories, and you will find, and we maintain war graves at more than 23,000 locations.
It's absolutely mind-boggling as we've gotten to work with you to just see the scope of the work and the challenges that you have as an organization, as you maintain, like you said, all of these cemeteries across the world and these different sites and the logistics behind it. It really is a service that the Commonwealth is doing, the Commonwealth War Graves Commission is doing to maintain these and the memories. And it's interesting. We were in Brookwood with you just in December, and you gave us a tour. And what always sticks out to me, Simon, is every cemetery seems to have a different story to it. I'm learning something, even when you were sitting in there and you were explaining the gentleman who came up with the font, basically to write into the stone, and I think it was sans serif or something like that. But these are the fonts that we write with to this day. And you were saying that, and what just catches me is each cemetery really does have a story to it. Is in your work, what is there a cemetery in particular that has a story that you really sticks with you or resonates with you?
Blimey, that's like being asked who's your favorite child. It's a really difficult one.
Yeah.
It's interesting, as you say. Every cemetery is special because every cemetery has its own unique sort of context. Certainly, when you get out onto former battlefields, they're not just there. They're there for real reasons. And I suppose one of the biggest challenges myself and my team have is that on the surface, all of our cemeteries look the same. There are those core features that you would expect to find in a war cemetery, a military cemetery. The headstones look the same wherever you go. There are core features of those sites where there is that familiarity, and that was very much part of what they were trying to establish, that equality of treatment, but also that sort of consistency of treatment. And therefore that's really difficult for people, because when you see that, if you go out to France or Belgium sort of thing, you can drive past cemetery after cemetery and they all look the same. But actually, as you say, it's actually when you get there and start looking at the detail, looking at the nuance, that you start to really see that every single one of them is different. It's understanding the context, but it's actually getting into the detail, as you said, talking about the font. So in the sort of establishment of the commission, Fabian Ware brings together the great architects, the great thinkers, and one of the men who works with him was the chairman of the British Museum, Sir Frederick Kenyon. And he's brought in to kind of sort of pull all these thoughts together and get all these ideas down. And he submits a report to the commission, comes down as the Kenyon report, in which he outlines the vision for the future. But as part of that, he's looking at all the detail. He talks about this consistency of approach, this uniform headstone, and there's all those things that emerge. But you then get into the detail, and if you can start explaining this to people, like I did with you folks, it's then sort of, as you say, even the font, there's that level of attention to detail that goes into these sites. Because the font, as I explained, when you're walking through a cemetery, you want to be able to read those headstones. They're not just there as a marker to the dead. They're actually a connection to the living. It's the relatives. It's the people walking through that cemetery who want to find a name. They want to see things. There's a whole engagement sort of thing with it. It doesn't just serve purpose. And therefore, you need to be able to read it from a distance. You need to be able to read it as you're walking along the side. You need to be able to read it when you're looking down on a grave, or you need to be able to read it when it's written high up on the wall. And therefore, a guy called Fraser MacDonald Gill, the font, creates a unique font for the commission so that there is something that is legible and serves and is fitting for that purpose. And as I said, it's that attention to detail. Now, coming back to your other sort of question, which cemetery? I don't know, you have different experiences, different times, sometimes in the same cemetery. Sometimes you can go and it can be a big, vast, overwhelming space in some of those big cemeteries. On other days, you'll be walking along and a particular name will leap out at you, and sort of there's suddenly a connection to that site that you didn't have the last time you visited. But for me, certainly when you go out onto former battlefields, there's that real connection to those sites that have strong connections to events, moments in time. So be they battlefield cemeteries, those that created on the battlefields with the fallen from a particular action. And therefore you can find yourself, stood in the middle of an isolated spot, but you're immediately connected by the names that are there, the regiments that are represented, the location of the cemetery itself, to suddenly connecting with why it was there, its origins, and what it's there and what is there today. So I don't know. As I said, it's often those smaller sites, but then again, I've spent wonderful periods of time walking around some of those bigger cemeteries. Tyne-Cot is somewhere that I've spent a lot of time. Tyne-Cot in Belgium, it's our largest cemetery. Just under 12,000 headstones, a memorial on the back wall with 34,000 names on it. The scale of commemoration there is vast, and it's quite an overwhelming site. But I've spent a lot of time working with our student guides there, and therefore there's something about that site and its location, its point on a battlefield, but also the choice. Where are you going to build what will become the Empire's largest cemetery? Well, actually, when you start to understand why Tyne-Cot is where it is, it's not just because it was on the battlefield, it's because you can see the battlefield, and you can see the Ypres battlefields, the battlefields on which 1 in 4 of Britain's casualties, or the British Empire's war casualties from the First World War, were lost. It suddenly, you're transformed to that, wow, this is more than just a point in time. There are connections, there's thought behind this. So as I said, it can range from a tiny little battlefield cemetery with a row of graves in, to the vastness of Tyne-Cot. So as I said, impossible to choose. I couldn't possibly name a single site. It'd be very unprofessional of me to have favourites.
I was going to ask, with the vastness of the portfolio at CWGC, if there were a passport of cemeteries that you visited, what percentage, how many countries have you visited that CWC operate within, do you think?
Not all that many, definitely in double figures. Of sort of visiting sites. I do keep a track of where I've been.
Do you?
Which sites I visit. Yeah, I do.
Yeah.
So I even get a ribbon for this internally, even at work. People give me a ribbon for this. This is proper geeky stuff. So certainly for France and Belgium, the Commonwealth War Graves Commission publishes an atlas, which is a sort of Michelin map with the location of all the war graves on. So, and in the back, there's a full listing. And for France and Belgium, there are hundreds of sites. So I do keep detailed track of which ones I've been to. And then, do make the effort to always try and get to somewhere new that I haven't been before.
Well, when we're
because again, every single one of them is different. It's not a case of, well, you've been to one, you've been to them all. It's that real experience of, the collector side of it, of ticking another one off, visiting somewhere else. But you also just find some sort of, just some stunning sites, just either tucked in a woodland or, visiting sites. One of the things I often do, again, very, very, sad, is head out in the evenings. I finish work. If I'm out in Belgium, I've got, right, what am I going to do in the evening? Well, of course, visit more cemeteries. But I remember one evening, a couple of summers ago, of, heading out south of Ypres into the sort of, the hill country, as they call it, and just the sun going down and just a beautiful summer's evening and some just, you were just there on your own, peace and quiet, beautiful evening, but surrounded by the names. And there's that real connection of just walking up and down the rows, and it's, you just connect with those sites. But as I said, each one is different. Each one has that different connection and can catch you on different days in different ways.
Well, I remember in Bayeux for the 80th of Normandy, you came up with one of those maps for me, and I thought it was really touching. And then we talked a little bit about some of the sites you've been and how you've highlighted those things, those different sites. And it kind of circles back again to the commission and these different cemeteries and how they do tell a story, like you said, from Tyne-Cot or Infall out in the Burma campaign and such. And there's a tennis court there where they literally were fighting right there. But and this is what I just think is absolutely unique about the sites is I think you're right. As you go by these sites, they all look the same ish. And then you get a little closer and you're like, wait a second. No, they don't. And you start looking at this. Yes, the headstones, it's uniform, but the designs are beautiful. And there's a story, and there's a bigger story. The context, the collectiveness of all these graves tell a story. And then what's really interesting is as you go by, and I think one of the most touching things I like is the family inscriptions that are written on the bottom of the graves. And you just go by, and every so often, just one really catches you that hits you in the heart a little bit. And so as you look at those individual stories, is there any individual story that sticks out to you? Because you've been to a lot of these sites, and I know you've done a ton of research. What is an individual story that might like to share?
Yeah, there are always certain stories that stick with you. Perhaps because of the way in which you see that they engage other people. Perhaps more so, sort of doing what I do. Yeah, there are sometimes all of those stories. I remember we spoke about this, being sort of fathers with family, that you suddenly see those connections, sort of thing. Remembering daddy, and forever missed by wife and kids back home, that sort of thing. Those sorts of things really hit home at times, sort of thing. I think some of the stories, there was always a story I told at Laysenhoek, which is a large cemetery in Belgium, of a John Edward Raphael, who was a lieutenant in the King's Royal Rifle Corps. He was a staff officer who died in 1917. And his story always struck a chord with, and still does, with groups that you take, because again, it's just sort of multifaceted. He was an individual who was, I suppose, had celebrity culture existed in the years before the First World War, perhaps in the same way as it does today, he'd be well known. He was a professional rugby player. He played for his country. He captained the British Lions, the greatest sort of collection of sort of rugby football players of their day. He played cricket for England in the summer months. He was an academic. He was destined for the bar. He was just an absolute leading light. War comes along. He joins up. He sees service. And tragically, he dies of wounds in 1917. And in many respects, that's where the story sort of stops. That's the date on his headstone in June of 1917. And somebody with such promise, a life sort of cut short. It's sort of representative of so many similar stories. But what was always different about his is then the story that continues beyond that point. And that's why I always took sort of great sort of pride in telling it. Because there was a story that a sort of decade or so later, a lady arrived at that cemetery on an autumn evening, and she arrived in a car driven to the cemetery, so clearly a lady of sort of wealth. On arrival at the car, she met the gardener, the commission gardener, who was working at the site, as he had done many times before. So this was a chap called Walter Sutherland, who'd stayed on after the war, former soldier, to look after the cemeteries. He'd married a local girl. And incidentally, his son, his grandson, have both continued working for the Commonwealth War Graves Commission, remarkably. Wow. But anyway, back to the story, and why I used to tell it was there was this then connection about this lady who'd then come to visit this particular grave, Jack, as he was known, Jack's grave. She'd spoken to the gardener who'd escorted her back, and she'd driven off. Now, about a year or so later, a small package arrived for the gardener, a box, and he knew exactly what to do, having read the note, and he remembered a conversation he'd held with an elderly lady the year before. And that evening, it's reported, after work, he went down to the grave, cut a slit into the soil above that grave, and scattered the ashes of Harriet Raphael, Jack's mum, who had been that lady who had visited a year before. And therefore, it's always such a powerful story, and it brings hairs on the back of my neck now, because it's that connection of what people almost expect from the stories of these lives cut short and these people who had so much promise. But it's also that connection to the families who were left behind and the loss that they experienced, and in this case, a mother's determination to be connected or to be buried alongside with her only child. But it's also the work of the Commonwealth War Graves Commission. And it's that ability, the work that our gardeners have done for 100 years and that they continue to do today, caring and maintaining for those sites, enabling families to grieve, and that's evolved and changed over time. But that the importance of the work that they do in sort of, themselves passing on these stories and supporting the families in sharing these stories. So, that's one story I always tell. And it always sort of hits home with those that you tell it to, because it's just that sort of multifaceted and really gets across that sense of loss, that it's not just the name that's on the headstone. There's a ripple effect. There's the guys who played rugby with him. There's the guys who played cricket against him. There's the family, the soldiers who served alongside him. And you just really appreciate that sort of ripple effect, but also the way in which that impacts upon the War Graves Commission and the work that we still do today.
Well, I'm kind of interested in your take on this too. Is from the inception of the Commonwealth War Graves Commission, which was to tend to and make sure these points of commemoration were there. There's something that's evolving, because as time goes by and the memories of these soldiers are fading and sometimes dying out with family members and individuals, there's this aspect of story that needs to be preserved as well. And what's your take on the importance
Well,
of that?
totally. I think we're moving into perhaps a new phase of remembrance. Those who remember these individuals, those who knew them, either firsthand or sort of immediately, that they were the children of type thing. Even those generations are very much sort of passing now. And therefore, we're moving into a new phase. And certainly as an organisation, it's now about, as you say, it's sharing those stories. It's capturing these from those who still have those memories, or those families that still have the photographs, or whatever it may be. But it's actually now capturing those and ensuring that they're preserved, as well as the record of formally who they served with, where they're buried, but actually the stories of these people, who they were, where they came from, what made them the person they were, beyond a name, a rank, and a number, and a war grave. It's something we're working a great deal on. So we, just over about 18 months ago, we launched a platform called Forevermore, which is all about capturing those stories. It's giving that detail to the story that doesn't exist in our records alone, of who this person was, putting a face to the name, adding that story. And therefore it's increasingly thinking about, how do we capture these? How do we preserve these? And how do we pass these on so that people can discover them, people find out more? And that's one of the great things we've been doing, working alongside you guys, is looking at how we can use the digital sphere, how we can engage people with devices and with platforms that share those stories and enable them to go to a cemetery and discover more about the people who are commemorated there. That whilst every headstone looks the same, the minute you start looking at it, the minute you start exploring it, every single one of them tells a different story.
Yeah, and and that's an interesting point, because as time goes by, it seems like technology is starting to change the way we remember, and there's this aspect of a risk of losing the story, but there's a shift to using this technology to preserve the story. When you look at like technology's role in the commission, and there's tons of different roles that it could play, what do you think is the importance of technology?
I think the key thing is just sort of sharing that information. There are many people who visit our sites across the world. They're now very much sort of established places to visit some of the bigger sites. There are lots of those who go out of the way to visit lots of the smaller ones. But we've got to consider the ways of enabling people to discover these stories and discover these sites in different ways. And when, technology has evolved so much in the last couple of decades, it gives those opportunities today that people can visit these sites, they can discover these stories in a device that they hold in their hand. And we're seeing that more and more, that people are keen to find out more, people are keen to discover more, people are interested in exploring these locations, even when they can't get there themselves. So they want to find out about where a distant relative or a lad on the village war memorial fought. And if that was on the other side of the world, then they can now explore that. They can, in a way that they just haven't been able to do up until now. And that information, and therefore it's making that information so much more readily available and easily accessible, that enables that discovery. And I think that's the important thing, is that for several generations, people knew exactly what name they were looking for. It was a relative, it was a father, an uncle, a grandfather sort of thing, somebody they had a direct connection to, and therefore they knew what they were looking for. Whereas now I think people are looking to discover more. They're looking to find connections to places. They're looking to uncover those family connections that they perhaps didn't know about. And therefore the technology allows that, because it allows that sort of careful curating of the stories. It allows you to put things in front of people. It allows you to direct people move people in different directions, which the sort of traditional records don't, because you need to know exactly what you're looking for.
Yeah, it's this. You use the word a couple times of it. It's about connection, really. It's people, I think, in life in general, connection and purpose and meaning. And sometimes, we see, and I've had friends that served in Afghanistan, and some of these soldiers coming back don't want to talk about these experiences. They're very painful. And I think that was an experience of many people after the First and Second World War, is not really wanting to talk. And it left maybe a gap for some people. And, even families, and you mentioned it several times, like families, the tremendous pain and loss on a family. And so generations down, here we are kind of looking back, and how do we connect with that? And I think that's part of honoring and part of the healing that needs to happen, is how do we cultivate those connections? And that's something you see with, Forevermore that the CWG is doing, or, just how you're deploying technology in this way really shows the forward thinking. As we look at other organizations that are in the similar field, I don't think anybody's at the same place that the Commonwealth is with this. And that's that creating connection and that meaning. When you think of commemoration space or your job, what is the biggest challenge then that you have?
Yeah, I think one of the big challenges we have, a number of challenges. One is creating those connections that we don't have that traditional connection that the organisation always had, that we were dealing with the next of kin directly, and therefore people were coming to us because they knew what we did. They had a real sense of, they knew why they were coming, sort of thing. Whereas as now you're perhaps having to explain a lot more about who we are and what we do than maybe we ever did before, because previously perhaps there was that assumed knowledge. People knew that their loved one's grave was looked after. They had a war grave. They were in a cemetery inn. Whereas today, I think, people perhaps just don't have that same connection or knowledge, sort of thing. Again, people often know we exist as an organisation. Oh yes, of course, war graves. Oh yes, I've been to your site. Okay, 23,000 of them. So which one?
Yeah.
Which one? Oh, the big one in France. Where there's that big wall that over. And what, you mean the one in Belgium? Yeah, that's it. Sort of thing. It's so it's and therefore when you start talking to people, they're just sort of blown away by the scale of our operation globally and the work that we do. And it's just, and I think that's the other thing, is that, as we've talked about already, when you go to our sites, there's such familiarity about how they were created. There's that familiarity in terms of the headstones look very similar in many parts of the world. The creation of gardens, in, again, nuances across the world depending on climate and all sorts of reasons. But generally, people know what they're going to find, and therefore they're not necessarily able to connect beyond that, because they walk in and they just see lots of headstones or see a memorial with lots of names on, and you can't see the detail because there's just too much of it, if that makes sense. So if you're looking at the names on a panel on the wall, well, all you can take in is there's loads of them. There's thousands of names. But actually, when you start getting into the detail, that's when you stop and pause, and that's when that information starts to really sink in. That if you, suddenly get caught stood in front of a headstone, you start reading it, and you go, oh, wow, that person was, 19 years old. They were killed on the 15th of September, 1916. Oh, look, there's a personal inscription on the bottom from the family. And people start looking at that detail, and they look at the one next to it, and they realise it's different, and they start to take in the story of that one. So I think that's the real challenge is enabling people to get down to that sort of micro level of the individual stories in amongst a sea of 1.7 million names.
Yeah, we kind of called it scraping the surface a little bit. And one of the entries and kind of the views we've taken is if we can allow people to connect with just one story that resonates with them, and that one story on that sea of name of like 30,000 names on that wall, right? And if there's just one name they can connect to, and then you start stepping back a little bit and you see all of these other names. I mean, there's no way we can absolutely connect with the totality of all that sacrifice. And so I really think it's about story and connection. And like you said, if you go and, you've done these battlefield tours, and you took us in an amazing tour in Brookwood and like walking us over to the grave of someone with the George Cross, it was, and you told us the story of the hand grenade and training and what was happening there. And then from one to the next. And I think when you're putting these stories together, it creates this connection again, right? It's a connection to something that was very significant to who we are today. And we had Matt and I had done a podcast a little while ago on, and I think the individual had said, or it was a call, one of the many calls, but it's like cemeteries are for the living. It's for us to remember. It's we honor, and there's something so important about that act of just remembering and connecting to those stories. So,
yeah. And Simon, you have speaking about remembering, connecting, you have a lot of opportunities this year for people to get out and see some of the sites and the work and the anniversaries coming up. Many Gate, Victory in Europe, VJ, Katie, lots going on. What are you most excited about?
Yeah. This year's an exciting year for the Men in Gate. So our memorial on the outskirts of Ypres in Belgium. For the last 2 years, we've been doing a major renovation and restoration project on it. And this year, the scaffold started coming down in December. The gate is being unveiled again, as it were, after being up there for coming up nearly 100 years now. And so very, very exciting. So this later this spring and into the summer, the public are going to be able to return to the gate and see it in all its glory. Sort of thing. The exciting thing about that's why I talked about sort of renovation and restoration is it hasn't been a process of putting it back to as it was. There's been the sort of active sort of preservation with a lot of it. There's lots of history sort of connected to it, not just in terms of what it is, but there's sort of battle damage from the Second World War on it. There's all sorts of stuff that just tells the story of the monument itself today. So that's sort of going on. But people will be able to get back over the summer months and really connect with that site again. So that's going on, connected to the First World War, and then in 2027 it'll be the 100th anniversary of the Men in Gate. There's lots of activity already being discussed and planned to mark that important centenary. And then, as you say, the major war commemorations this year are very much based around victory in Europe and victory over Japan, the 80th anniversaries of those. So we're busy working up our plans. Our colleagues on the ground, our gardening staff, our operational colleagues have been working very hard for a long time already in making sure that sites that they know are going to have connections will be looking their absolute best for those commemorations. But certainly from an engagement point of view, we're working on our plans at the moment in terms of engaging the public, enabling them to sort of understand and connect those stories. So a lot of what we'll be doing this year will be based around that theme of forevermore, sharing those stories, whether it be a launch in the UK with UK Parliament that will take place sort of early this spring, and then a whole series of activities I was going to say across the UK, but actually across the UK, across Europe, and in fact probably globally, at some of our key sites connected with the Second World War, giving people the opportunity both physically to come to these spaces, to attend events, to learn more of the stories of those commemorated there, but also digitally, and in sort of the virtual space, making these sites more accessible, encouraging more visitors in that way. And then one of the other things, so those are major events, but also sort of underlying this, number of activities right across the globe that people can get involved in. So each May, as an organisation, we have a sort of an awareness week called War Graves Week. And throughout that, we have events going on all over the globe, opportunities for schools, for young people, for the communities to get to know their local war graves, so to visit their local sites. So we've got over 100 locations right across the UK. We've got sites in Canada, in France, in Belgium, the Netherlands, heading out into Africa. So in Nairobi, we'll have lots of activity right across sort of the Far East, places like Hong Kong, Singapore, where again, activity will be taking place. Again, encouraging people to come and discover more about who we are as an organisation, but importantly, the stories of those we commemorate. So yeah, always plenty to do. But yeah, the 80th anniversary is at the end of the Second World War will be important sort of commemorations this year.
And I just talking about you before the commission, you spent some time at the University College London, is that right? UCL?
That's right. Yeah. Prior to joining the commission, I ran the UK government's national education project during the First War centenary period. So yeah, an incredible opportunity to work with teachers, looking at how we teach the First World War, but also running an extensive battlefields program, which took youngsters, around 8,500 youngsters, out to France and Belgium, out to the battlefields of the First World War.
I was going to ask if you kept a record of the number of lives touched with this, and it's really interesting to see that trend line kind of through your career.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, the history of the First and the Second World War was always a passion, always was. I don't know where it came from, but certainly from an early age, always that sort of fascination, that interest, certainly through school. Interestingly enough, I wrote to the Commonwealth War Graves Commission when I was 18 to see if there were any sort of summer jobs or anything I could do for them. Got a very polite, no, there aren't, back. And then went into teaching, used to run sort of school battlefield tours, loved teaching the modules and topics around the First and the Second World Wars. And then, yeah, an opportunity came up just prior to 2014 to go to UCL and the Institute of Education to lead the UK government's education programme for the centenary. Which was just, amazing. And not only the teachers and the young people we work with directly, but seeing, as you say, those ripple effects back into their schools, back into their communities through the projects we encourage them to do. And it very much felt as though that sort of next generation was being engaged with these sites, these places, and importantly, those stories. And we're feeling those connections to young men and women, old men and women in some cases, they're not all young, but those who came from their communities. So these may not be people who themselves have long connections to those communities, but they were. So I remember, two young lads from North London, from Tottenham, both of whom, their family's heritage is outside the UK, but they completely connected with this story of this lad from Tottenham who lived on a street that they walked down to get to school. Sort of thing. They walked past his front door. They understood where he would have got the train from. Sort of thing. There were all those connections that they had, and they just completely adopted this soldier and did so much to share his story. Yet, culturally, their heritage very, very different. But there was that sense of, I know where he was from. I know where he lived. I know where he went to school. That primary school's still there. So all those connections comes back again. We were talking. It's those connections I think people can build. And I think that's one of the exciting things about the phase we're going into is those communities rediscovering some of those connections where they'd perhaps either been forgotten, lost, or just not understood. So communities, and that's the nature of our work as the Commonwealth War Graves Commission, but also remembering the stories of those who served for British Imperial forces. So whether that be Canadians who were part of British Imperial forces at that time, or South Africans or Kenyans, or those from the West Indies. These are communities that were affected by these conflicts, yet today are commemorated in the same way within our site. So being able to bring those communities closer to their heritage, their history as well, is also a really exciting part of the future.
Yeah. And speaking about global impact, I know you have a kind of a conversation going in Kenya as well.
Yeah, we do. So we're doing a lot of work in Kenya. We launched a project a couple of years ago as a result of a report that was published into cases of historical non-commemoration. So those who'd been missed out through the original process of gathering the records. Again, it's very, very nuanced, but a lot of it was sort of underlying themes of, in some cases, certainly in Africa, of, black soldiers don't need commemorating in the same way as the white ones do. So don't worry about it. Or they were only kind of temporary labourers. We don't need to worry about them. Yet elements of the commission were saying we do. They were in the service. They fall under our criteria. Therefore, we do need to remember them. Yet elements of the colonial authorities were saying, no, they're not interested. Don't worry about it. Yet 100 years on, we're now looking at that and going, no, these were historic wrongs and these need righting. So an example of this is that just last week, we unveiled a new memorial in Cape Town to 1,700 predominantly black South African labourers whose names had previously been missed from the record. And an entirely new memorial is built to ensure that they are appropriately commemorated. And as you say, we're doing a lot of work in East Africa at the moment to, again, ensure that we are capturing names. And over 10,000 have been added to our record as a result directly of that project, and continue to be on almost sort of weekly, monthly basis of names that had been missed off for all sorts of reasons, whether that be a lad who comes home, dies, and the family don't realise that he's entitled to a war grave and commemoration and therefore never submit his name and sort of thing, and he's now being graves are now being marked, to East African labourers who were recruited and never overlooked for commemoration. It's as I said at the beginning, we're still doing everything we were created for, whether that be adding names to our record or building cemeteries and memorials to ensure that they're marked. And the critical thing now is ensuring that people are connecting with those sites and passing those stories on, or reconnecting with those stories. You were talking about Kenya, and when I was in Nairobi year last autumn, it was working with a group of local East African tour guides from the biggest sort of association there. And they were like, this is the British Cemetery. And I was like, okay. Well, it is called the British Cemetery, which is unfortunate because it's sort of British Imperial. And in fact, by the time we'd spent 3 hours walking around and sharing stories and understanding the cemetery, they realised that 4/5 of those buried there are Africans.
Yeah.
And therefore, they had a connection. They're like, well, I know that name. That name still comes from my village, or that's my tribe. And there's that real connection. And they were blown away by something that they perceived because of its labelling wasn't actually the case. And when they started looking at that detail, they could see their own connection to these sites and sort of thing. And that's such an important part, as I said, of what we do. And it also brings that unity as well, because they start going, well, hang on, is that I understand why this is now like it is. And actually, there was care taken over this, and there was sort of care taken over that. I can see my connection to this, and it links to your connection to this. And it's that sort of common ground and that common cause for commemoration and remembrance.
Yeah, and I was really struck by the Commission's approach to the Cape Town Memorial, and the connections with modern day descendants. Can you share a little bit more about kind of? I know it's maybe a big question, but how the memorial came to be, how it was, how there was a competition around it, and then also the groundwork that was done, finding descendants, getting their stories.
That's it. So with what is now the Cape Town, as of last week, is formerly the Cape Town Labour Corps Memorial. This came about, again, the names reached us due to a sort of volunteer project that sat with outside of the Commission, called In From the Cold, which was all about sort of finding the names of those who hadn't been commemorated. And they came across this list, the origins of a list of around 1,700 names. And with 1,700 names, there was nowhere that currently existed in the Commission's sort of infrastructure and set up for them to be appropriately commemorated. So a new memorial was absolutely the most appropriate way of doing it. So conversations took place in South Africa with local communities, with government, about the best way to do this, and certainly the connections we made with descendants to get their opinion. All felt that yes, they should be commemorated in the same way that we've been commemorating people for the last 100 years, i.e. individually by name. As a result of that, decisions were made about finding an appropriate location, and they actually settled or actually got then sort of agreement to build this memorial in Companies Gardens, which is one of the oldest public sites in Cape Town. It's very close to some imperial monuments, but also some memorials connected to the First World War, particularly the Delville Wood Memorial. So really important of finding a location that has that sort of relevance and importance already. But as you say, after over 100 years, and certainly dealing with elements of society that had been almost ignored previously, it was really important to start connecting with those descendants. And in many cases, they were discovering their connections for the first time. They perhaps knew there was a story of a great-grandfather or something who had been pulled into service, had gone off to war, and they had no knowledge at all about what happened to him beyond he never came home. So giving them that point, that place where, one, they were no longer overlooked and forgotten, but two, where there was that appropriateness of commemoration equal to how others had been commemorated in the same way for the last 100 years, was really, really important. So yeah, as you said, once this had been agreed that a memorial was necessary, it then went out to an architectural design competition, and Dean J Architects, a South African architectural company, won that by creating this incredible memorial that is based not so much on stone as many of our memorials traditionally were, and not using sort of classical design, again, as many of our previous sort of memorials had been sort of inspired by, but actually creating this this sort of woodland effect, using wooden markers, wooden poles, African in origin, with each one representing an individual. So you get that real immediate visual impact of 1,700 poles, and each one of those representing one person. They're stood upright. Each one has the name of those individuals on them. But also, that representing perhaps there was that suggestion that they then represent those woodlands and those forests that are decimated by war and destruction, those sort of stumps that are left. So there's that, there could be those trees, that connection. So hinting at the impact that war has in that way. So bringing all that together and then creating those sort of natural sort of walkthroughs and looking at thoroughfares through the company's gardens and thinking about how people use this space. They created this absolutely incredible, very impactful memorial that today suitably commemorates those 1,700 people who for 100 years had been all but forgotten.
That's beautiful. I think if I could, I hearing all this and all the work, it's the question I want to ask is how can listeners support you and the work of the commission and kind of keep up with all the goings on?
So there's lots of ways you can do that. There's various newsletters and things you can sign up for. We have a website on which we host those records of those 1.7 million individuals, CWGC.org. All that information, there's regular sort of news updates, blogs, all sorts of things that you can find out more about us as an organisation. But we've also, and those who want to perhaps contribute in a different way, we've also got a foundation charity which looks to bring in grants and funding for our educational, our outreach programs as well. So ensuring that those new generations discover these stories, and therefore the Commonwealth War Graves Foundation does such important work in ensuring that myself and my team can get out there, can work with the public, and importantly can look at those different ways in which we engage them with the stories of all of those that we commemorate.
Awesome. Well, Simon, thank you so much for joining us today. This has been great to hear all the different just takes on the work in general, what the CWGC is up to. It's mind-boggling to think just the amount of work that you're doing and continuing to do as new memorials go up, as you look into the non-commemoration, as you look into even stuff we didn't talk about, which we'll have to save to another podcast, but the identification of graves and unknown soldiers and what happens. We'll have to have you on the show again, because it's always fascinating listening to just the wealth of information and the work that you're doing at the commission. And so thanks again for joining us today. And for our listeners, we will make sure to update the show notes with the links that you can go on to find a little bit more about what the CWGC is doing. Forevermore, if you have information you'd like to share to make sure that connection is made from this generation to the next. Simon, thanks so much again for joining us.
It's been a pleasure. I look forward to next time.